My parents took me to a specialist who was able to diagnose my dyslexia in 3rd grade.
Despite early warning signs, the school did not identify her dyslexia. Dyslexia can be identified as early as kindergarten.
I could be your child.
Get the facts about dyslexia. Additional credible information may also be located at the International Dyslexia Association's website. Get the facts about dyslexia. It could make all the difference.
So exactly what is dyslexia? Let's look at an interview from the International Dyslexia Association and then take a look at the Texas Handbook for Dyslexia.
I couldn't read. I felt helpless. I look at a page and see characters separated by random white spaces. Other kids
called me stupid. Teachers said I would never get into college.
But then you became my teacher and realized I had dyslexia.
You got me tested. You told me that I could overcome. Most of all, you gave me confidence.
I did get into college, and now I'm the CEO of my own company with over 20 patents.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you, Ms. Benowitz.
The story that you just heard about Patrick Whaley, who is dyslexic, is very important because it shows the incredibly important role of a teacher who knows what dyslexia is and then provides the intervention that he needs and gives him back his own self-confidence. I think you would enjoy going to the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity's website, reading more about dyslexia, and have many of your questions addressed.
After watching the video, please take the time to review the contents of the handbook. The state of Texas provides us with a working definition, and it also provides us with guidelines so we can use them to identify students who are struggling because of dyslexia. Let's take a quick look at the Dyslexia Handbook. Page 1 gives you the table of contents. From this, we can see that on page 8 is where we find our definition and characteristics of dyslexia. Let's go there now. Here's page 8. You see the title is Definition and Characteristics of Dyslexia. Provides you an excerpt from the Texas Education Code. Gives you a specific definition. It's subject 1, talking about dyslexia means a disorder of constitutional origin. And continues. You'll see the second part talks about related disorders, which include disorders similar to or related to dyslexia, such as developmental auditory imperceptions, dysphagia, specific developmental dyslexia, developmental dysgraphia, and developmental spelling disabilities. Goes on to give an excerpt and a quote from the International Dyslexia Association, which I'm not going to read to you, but please take the time when you have the opportunity to download this book, which is available at the Region 10 website. It's also available at the TEA website with a link for downloading from an external source, and you can download it directly from this page. You can also just refer back to this TouchCast anytime you want and take over and follow the links. Feel free to look through any part of the manual at this point. Remember, we're trying to emphasize the definition of dyslexia. And let's return to the presentation.
Take a moment to read the following. How was that? Frustrating? Slow? What were those sentences about? They're actually a simulation of the experience of dyslexia. designed to make you decode each word. Those with dyslexia experience that laborious pace every time they read. When most people think of dyslexia, they think of seeing letters and words backwards, like seeing B as D and vice versa, or they might think people with dyslexia see saw as was. The truth is, people with dyslexia see things the same way as everyone else. Dyslexia is caused by a phonological processing problem, meaning people affected by it have trouble not with seeing language, but with manipulating it. For example, if you heard the word cat and then someone asked you, remove the C, what word would you have left? At. This can be difficult for those with dyslexia. Given a word in isolation like fantastic, students with dyslexia need to break the word into parts to read it. Fan, tas, tick. Time spent decoding makes it hard to keep up with peers and gain sufficient comprehension. Spelling words phonetically like S-T-I-K for stick and F-R-E-N-S for friends is also common. These difficulties are more widespread and varied than commonly imagined. Dyslexia affects up to 1 in 5 people. It occurs on a continuum. One person might have mild dyslexia, while the next person has a profound case of it. Dyslexia also runs in families. It's common to see one family member who has trouble spelling, while another family member has severe difficulty decoding even one-syllable words like catch. The continuum and distribution of dyslexia suggest a broader principle to bear in mind as we look at how the brains of those with dyslexia process language. Neurodiversity is the idea that because all our brains show differences in structure and function, we shouldn't be so quick to label every deviation from the norm as a pathological disorder, or dismiss people living with these variations as defective. People with neurobiological variations like dyslexia, including such creative and inventive individuals as Picasso, Muhammad Ali, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, and Cher, clearly have every capacity to be brilliant and successful in life. So here's the special way the brains of those with dyslexia work. The brain is divided into 2 hemispheres. The left hemisphere is generally in charge of language and ultimately reading, while the right typically handles spatial activities. fMRI studies have found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than the brains of those without it. This means when they read a word, it takes a longer trip through their brain and can get delayed in the frontal lobe. Because of this neurobiological glitch, they read with more difficulty. But those with dyslexia can physically change their brain and improve their reading. With an intensive multisensory intervention that breaks the language down and teaches the reader to decode based on syllable types and spelling rules, the brains of those with dyslexia begin using the left hemisphere more efficiently while reading, and their reading improves. The intervention works because it locates dyslexia appropriately, as a functional variation in the brain, which naturally shows all sorts of variations from one person to another. Neurodiversity emphasizes this spectrum of brain function in all humans, and suggests that to better understand the perspectives of those around us, we should try to not only see the world through their eyes, but understand it through their brains.
So the next question is, what exactly is a teacher supposed to do if they suspect that a student has dyslexia? Once again, we refer to the Texas Handbook. It gives us specific guidelines to follow.
On page 13 of the handbook, we find the procedures for the assessment and identification of students with dyslexia. And there's a couple of quotes here, but I wanted to go ahead and go on up to page 14, where it talks about, at the very top, I wanted to highlight, in Texas and throughout the country, there is a focus on a response to intervention or tiered intervention process as a vehicle for meeting the academic and behavioral needs of all students. The components of the Student Success Initiative and other state-level programs offer additional support. Current federal legislation under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act calls for the use of benchmark assessments for early identification of struggling students before they fail. In fact, state law requires the use of early reading assessments that are built on substantial evidence of best practices. Carefully chosen, these assessments can give crucial information about a student's learning and can provide a basis for the tiered intervention model. Through the tiered intervention process, schools can document students' learning difficulties, provide ongoing assessment, and monitor reading achievement progress for students at risk for dyslexia or other reading difficulties. Early intervention is further emphasized as a result of research using neuroimaging. I do want to take the time to point out that we want to start with the RTI process for all students, but if for any reason a teacher suspects dyslexia, I wanted to stress the point that even though we want to start and use the RTI process, the tiered intervention model for all children, that when a trained educator suspects dyslexia because they see the characteristics and they have it documented, that should not, the RTI process itself should not delay the request for the assessment for dyslexia. And when a parent request is made, we will not delay the beginning of an assessment simply to begin the RTI process. So these should run concurrently.
All right. Formal assessment always starts with vision and hearing screening done by the campus nurse. Once the student has passed the vision and hearing screening, then the parent permission needs to be obtained using the appropriate. So in addition to getting parent permission for dyslexia screening, if the student's being serviced through a 504 process, we need to ensure that all the 504 procedures are being followed. Make sure you contact your 504 coordinator at your campus to ensure that you are following each of the guidelines. If the student is being serviced through the special education office, make sure that the procedures are being followed for special education. The request must be done in an ordered setting, and the committee must agree to make the recommendation for assessment. Parental permission must be obtained in writing in either case.
Also included in the handbook, just after the definition of dyslexia, it lists the characteristics. In other words, those things that we're looking for as classroom teachers that would tell us that this child might possibly have difficulty in reading because of dyslexia and possibly needs to be assessed. Not everybody who has these characteristics is dyslexic, but it's an indicator that should give you concern, where we want to do a little bit more digging and find out exactly why the child is experiencing these types of difficulties. The list of the characteristics begins on the same page as the definition, page 8, and continues on to page 9, and lists quite a few things that you could see. Common risk factors at the bottom of page 9, a delay in learning to talk, difficulty with rhyming. This is for preschool children. And it goes on up to kindergarten and first grade. And we're going to go on to the bottom of page 10 and look at the characteristics that would be typical in middle school and high school. So many of the previously described behaviors remain problematic. So you want to look at the ones in the lower grades. But in addition, we have along with the following, and that's difficulty with the volume of reading and written work, frustration with the amount of time required and the energy expended for reading, difficulty with written assignments, tendency to avoid reading, particularly for pleasure, difficulty learning a foreign language. And it goes on into post-secondary. Some of these avoidance issues develop into problems that we see with attendance. Some of these learned behaviors that the children exhibit come out in other ways that may be viewed as as rather than an academic issue, but a disciplinary issue. But the basis may very well be in the avoidance of the skill that they are weakest in. This is not to say that all children who avoid class or attempt to avoid class could possibly be dyslexic, because sometimes it is, in fact, a discipline issue. But there are times that it can lead to the question of if it's coupled with some of the other symptoms or characteristics that we're looking at, namely when they're avoiding reading and they have difficulty in reading when they do read for you. So you just want to keep each of these in mind. And please remember, take your time and review each of the characteristics. And you can always ask your campus, RICA, for additional help.